The IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, it was the past. Is it now the future of the internet?
Yeah, so for some reason, I've been thinking a lot about the IETF recently. And the reason is it felt like not that long ago that it was in the doldrums. And there was a lot of other tech. The way you can measure the IETF's effectiveness is the number of RFCs, i.e.
Sorry, can you just unpack a little bit of
this? So the IETF
what is the IETF and what are RFCs, just quickly?
Yeah, the IETF is the Internet Engineering Task Force, and it fundamentally creates standards for the internet. And it's a sort of a multi-stakeholder body put together by internet engineers, and it was the original body that helped
the standards are like HTML, HTTPS, these sort of things that we come up with in browser bars, how web pages are written, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and obviously it's much more advanced these days, but all the things that make the internet work. And the big focus these days is usually around security, sort of improving security on the internet. So it's an interesting body that runs in a peculiar but a very interesting way. But in recent years, big tech, your Googles and Amazons and Microsofts and so on and so forth, have been developing their own standards, and they've seen this as being very valuable for them. And so the IETF has somewhat lost its sort of and
just to be clear, from my point of view as an engineer about standards, you had things like MS-DOS, Microsoft DOS, which a lot of engineers say led to many of the disasters we've had, even lately with sort of CrowdStrike and stuff, having to protect Microsoft from its own crap system, where it basically branched and created low-level basic interoperability, basic input-output systems of its own because they were cooler and more about what they wanted. And so they developed proprietary standards that then they offered to the world as a standard, but it wasn't agreed with everybody. It was just cooler for them. Would you agree?
Yes. And there's the advantage of having a much broader standard, lots of people's eyeballs on a standard, is you tend to pick out the holes and make it more interoperable. It's a better way of doing things. But for big tech companies, obviously they would prefer to have their standard in control because then they get a level of market control. And that's been the way that it's going. But recently, I think particularly with the sort of geopolitical troubles that we're having right now, I hear a lot of people talking more strongly and with sort of greater enthusiasm about the IETF. So, for example, at DNSRF, we're about to start on a piece of work looking at how to engage more companies within the IETF. And then I'm on the board of Nominet that runs .uk, and we were talking about this week about greater engagement with the IETF. And then also, quite interesting recently, like Blue Sky, which is now the new sexy app, they have a protocol which people were criticizing them over. So then in order to gain acceptance for their protocol, they said, well, we're going to push it forward into the IETF. And that basically pushing it to the IETF was a shorthand for we are part of you. We're part of the internet community. And so I get the feeling that the IETF is about to become fashionable again, because we are entering a slightly difficult period. And big tech, I think, is realizing it actually does need to work a little bit more across the internet. And we're getting a little bit worried about things breaking apart in different parts of the world.
Emily, I sense this. I feel this. Emily, how many women are in the IETF? How is that? How representative is that at the moment? Is that all solved now? We were talking about this some time ago.
I think it's hard to be a woman in the IETF. There's the group Sisters, which our own Carolina Cairo is a co-chair of. So there are some women in the IETF. It's difficult to be a woman in the IETF. You have to be an incredibly resilient person. You have to put up with just sort of thoughtless sexism and
I
being
think also
talked down to just because of your gender.
And I don't think that's just to women, though, is it?
I think it's to any outsider. I would not fit in at all at IETF, and I just wouldn't even try.
So you're not welcome.
I'm not of the blood royal. No, I'm not. I'm not welcome there. And I will no doubt be mansplained to by several engineers after this show why I'm wrong and they're right, and I just need to change. Kieran, I wanted to pick up your geopolitical point because I think tinfoil hat firmly in place. I think I also sense an undercurrent here of, the geopolitical tensions are ramping up. Next year is going to be a big year with the 20th anniversary of the World Summit on the Information Society. There is a sense from the multi-stakeholder community that we have to use it or lose it with some of these institutions that were built in the 90s. So the sort of newfound enthusiasm for standardising in the IETF, I think it is right, because compared to the intergovernmental alternative, the ITU, you do get robust engagement. That sort of challenging atmosphere that I've just been deriding is actually incredibly important for getting good technical solutions too. But I think that there's probably some tactical rediscovery of the IETF that's going on from actors who can see the writing on the wall potentially if we don't make those multi-stakeholder institutions function better.
Kieran, tactical rediscovery.
I think that's right. I also think, sort of being a slightly more positive frame of mind, I think it's like we're rediscovering what worked and why it worked. And my hope is, and you're right, there are cultural issues in the IETF, but we are talking about them a lot more these days. And so my hope is, if this does become increasing relevance, if people are inputting more into this, that the organization, those components of the organization will have to change. The people bringing in these new standards are younger. They have a different generation. They have a different mindset, and they won't put up with some of the behaviors from the older generation. So I'm hopeful that this sort of increased focus on getting these standards through the IETF and using that process will bring with it some cultural change.
So I'm not going to explain all these acronyms. Just to there's the bones of the internet, which are like ICANN, IGF, IETF, ITU, and people seem to be examining. And those organisations seem to be, well, I think with the exception of ICANN, those organisations seem to be sort of reviewing what they're doing and why they're doing it. ICANN, the only conversation I hear is that they want to sound like they're doing that. But the minute they engage with that, they retrench, would you say? But the others really seem to be trying to, we got WSIS plus 20. I'm sorry to just use all these acronyms, but there seems to be a lot of examining going on, wouldn't you say, Kieran, about the value, the purpose of these organisations?
Society is going through a big rethink of the internet. We've got new laws to deal with social media. We've seen the impact that can, and we used to celebrate it when it sort of led to revolutions in the Middle East, but now we're having the impact on the Western societies as well. And so we're reevaluating the internet and how we do things. And we are looking back at these organizations that sort of help set it up and help run it, that have gone a little bit out of fashion. And I think people are rediscovering them and saying, well, actually, with some improvements and some tweaks, these could actually really help us reach the same understanding that we originally reached. And then hopefully have fewer laws, because more and more laws equals more and more problems.
And if that leads to a better internet for the consumer, better language scripting recognition, better security, more inclusion of women, that these don't become sort of just really hard little tech angry groups where the communication seems to be so angry, that's to be applauded. And I think it's good for any, wouldn't you say, industry, Emily, to review what it does and how it's doing it and its cultures and norms. Isn't that a sign of it growing up?
Yeah, I think it is. I think a big challenge for those organisations is, with a global internet, with a multipolar world where ideologies are very different, how do we accommodate for that? How do we make sure that those multi-stakeholder communities function in bringing people together who wouldn't normally sit together, without being overly naive to the ideological differences and the differences of approach from different countries? Very difficult to do.
We'll watch this space.
I want to just jump in on that. Is also, if we do include more women into these organizations, and they're coming, I hope, and I'm going to horribly stereotype, but women tend to be much better at talking outside of their groups and doing the socialization, which is so important in getting complicated things done. Whereas the engineers are typically middle-aged white men who are notorious for putting everything into a box and talking to that box and then talking to that box. So I'm hopeful with the introduction of more women in these situations, that we'll end up with a model that just works better.
Thank you for being brave enough.
Those women are going to have to be very resilient.
Thank you for being brave enough to say that, although I do agree with both of those points. And it's fantastic. So we're nearly out of time. We've got time for a couple more things. Please like us, follow us, share. We need you. We love doing this, and we want to keep on doing this. Before we wrap up, Voice of God, do we have a comment of the week? Last 2 weeks you said no.
We do have a comment of the week this week. This is from ShawnyBoy3 on YouTube. This is in response to the British Airways CEO outsourcing their IT work to India, I think you said. And this comment says, "This same leader will get a job elsewhere and repeat it. I worked somewhere where someone came in and did the same thing, made mass cuts in specialist knowledge. It was done because that leader wanted to show on his CV that he could transform a company to get a CEO role elsewhere. Look at the cost savings I made, and look, I can make tough decisions."
ShawnyBoy3, the first thing I'm going to say as an engineer is I applaud you and totally agree with you, but my colleagues here have ribbed me for ranting.
I have seen this behaviour. I mean, it's not as simple as that, but there's certainly an element. This is what ShawnyBoy3 is saying is definitely a manifestation of a bigger problem with a sort of a cadre of people that are CEOs and CFOs.
And to ShawnyBoy3, thank you for your comment. And thanks, everyone. There's been a lot of comments this week, especially about watches, Lucian. But I love
that the watch repair mafia got to Lucian.
Yeah, they got to him.
Not the mafia, the watch repair nice people who are nice. I've actually bought a watch this week to apologise.
But to Shawnee Boy's point, I was talking to somebody from an organisation who are now trying to insource a cybersecurity function that has been outsourced, and they just don't have any of the skills that they need to build those those functions back in. So sort of eliminating those highly skilled workforces within a company has incredibly long-term effects.
Thank you very much. We could really, really go on and on about this. I tell you, I've got loads I'd like to say. Anyway.